It's a pretty risque thumbnail image today, Charles, compared to what we normally do. But, I just am getting very, very fed up that for people who don't know, Norm Eisen was the attorney for this former Olympian accused of vandalizing the reflecting pool. And they dropped the case. How are you, Charles?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking, Jason. Hope you're well. Recovered from my weekend. I think the situation, looking at it from far away here in Malaysia, looking at the U.S., um, this idea that you can have a partisan hack who met Barack Obama at Harvard Law School, if not earlier, um, and who was tapped to be the ethics czar of all things in the Obama maladministration, that person could then go off and, on the one hand, set up a whole bunch of nonprofits and action organizations, and on the other hand, uh, make it his business to launch as many lawsuits as possible to gum up a duly elected president and his administration. There's a total imbalance here, between the powers wielded by this guy, um, and the process of that we go through every 4 years of trying to determine who's going to be the president of the United States, in theory, the most powerful office in the land. And what I don't understand is why Trump is tolerating this. I don't get it. I mean, Norm Eisen has an appalling track record in government. What was he doing as ethics czar? What was he actually doing? I mean, because you sit there and you look at, people question every aspect of the Trump Justice Department. When Eric Holder, the first Attorney General, confirmed by the Senate in the Obama administration, was asked, what his role was, he said flat out, "I am Barack Obama's wingman," and he got away with it, and he gets away with it to the present day. He was paid from 21 forward. I'm sorry, from 17 forward. Say Eric Holder was a highly paid lawyer, um, going around, perhaps working with Eisen, perhaps not, but going around and just doing his level best to make it to perpetuate I would argue, the Russian collusion delusion, and to make it his business to stop Trump from fulfilling his duly elected duties. So you have Eisen doing this now. You had, certainly during the Obama administration, the second that, if you go through, you read the ghost-written book, uh, The Promised Land, I think it's called, um, Obama or the ghostwriter go on for pages about how pissed Obama was about Trump's accusation concerning Obama's origin story. He was really pissed. And in the mic drop moment, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where Obama thought he was being really clever, disparaging Trump's accomplishments in the private sector, and he literally dropped the mic, saying, well, maybe Trump should run for president. Now, I'm sure Trump had thought beforehand about running for president, but as a guess, that defiant act by Obama, thinking that Trump would never leave the private sector to take on the massive job of becoming president of the United States, I think that Obama instigated. That was probably the nail in the coffin for Obama's swindles, frankly. And yet, here we are. There's a clear path. It's yes, Obama and Holder and the people and the Clintons. Yes, those are all tough targets. But you're the president of the United States right now. To get something done in Iran, you got to get a new government there, and you've got to put a lot of people away. That's a heavy lift. So you're happy to do that, but meanwhile you've got this open set of wounds in the resistance that is ongoing and now smells blood. Right? He's invested a lot. Trump has invested a lot of political capital, saying that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize because he can stop all these wars. Not going so well in Iran
The whole
at
thing's
all.
a mess, Charles. And I mean, I just don't understand. There's so much actionable material here with Norm in terms of investigating this Democracy Defenders Action Fund, the abuse of these 501c3, 501c4 structures. I mean, obviously, I would know nothing about this if you hadn't taught me all about it. But when I got involved in creating, filing those amicus curiae briefs, it seemed quite effective in stopping the signal gate case because I raised serious defects in the case, some of which had to do with the legal and financial structure of the plaintiff in one of them. And it seemed obvious to me nobody involved, including the judge, wanted to delve into that. They just ended the whole case.
Right. Yeah, this idea, that you have lawyers who some always find a way in any controversy to be paid. That you would have this lawyer um, launch all these lawsuits. How much is he personally making off this, one way or another, and then get involved with it. On the one hand, you have what's supposed to be a purely tax exempt operation, nonpartisan tax exempt operation. Everything that Norm Eisen does is partisan, nakedly partisan. And I have a very hard time accepting the idea that the paperwork on these twinned organizations could actually be correct. We've learned from the Clinton stuff that if you're prepared, I'm not saying Eisen is lying under oath, but with the Clintons, if you're prepared to lie under oath, and if you're prepared to operate a whole bunch of organizations that sound the same but technically are not, or maybe not are not even formally um, established, then you can raise there's a gigantic wing of people who are all for anarchy and chaos and protecting Obama and protecting the notion that the Obama and Clinton years were, the greatest age in the greatest period in the modern age for America. We need to go back and get back into a similar deal going forward under some other crazy president. Um, that I say that I bring that up because there's that story that you and I think had talked about on our last podcast briefly. There's some woman living in a trailer park whose house burned down, and she is a partisan lefty, but she doesn't have a pot. Literally, does not have a pot to pee in. She doesn't own a. I don't think she owns a phone. Maybe that's Hunter Biden I'm thinking of. But her name has shown up as in small donations, like 15,000 different donations, totaling $150,000. And she was confronted over that by someone, and she said, "I don't have that kind of money." How much of this Eisen hoopla is being funded by Act Blue and by these organizations that just appropriate people's names and say that they actually were the contributor, when in fact the money came from some very suspicious source, maybe tied to a foreign government or to a hostile party. So I mean, this is not in Iran. They can cause a lot of trouble for many people around the planet, but President Trump is responsible first for the United States of America. And inside the United States of America, the will of the people has been frustrated by principally, octogenarians, 80-year-olds, like Bernie Sanders and others, who go around and say, oh, yes, we've got to count every vote in an election, but then proceed when an election happens to say, oh, no. That election didn't settle anything. Or more recently, we have the Supreme Court saying that the president does have the right to revoke temporary protected status. Now, some liberal judge has said, issued an opinion saying, "Fuck that! You can't deport Somalis." I mean, this is what Eisen, Obama, and the people who went through Harvard Law School in the moment where that critical legal studies movement was flourishing. And indeed, there was a professor at Harvard then called Derek Bell, excuse me, who was one of the chief acolytes or proponents of this Marxist critical legal studies bullshit. And one of Obama's acts at Harvard was to lead, rallies in favor of this guy, Bell. So when you look, when you look at Obama and what he stands for, and now Eisen and what he's doing to protect Obama's legacy, these principles are fringe theories. They're not even far left. They're fringe crackpot theories, which at root are designed to destroy the fabric of life in America and bring down the government. That's what they're trying to do. That is a much more serious threat to every American, including Eisen. Because when America falls apart, his life will fall apart too. I mean, that is a very serious threat. And you and I have spent a lot of time pointing the way towards these people in Washington, D.C. Instead of suing some former Olympian over vandalism, lock the Clintons up, lock their donors up, lock Bill Gates up. Lock the people, go to China, and as part of the trade deal, say, bring me the head, alive, of Neville Singman. And then his wife, I don't think his wife is over in communist China. I could be wrong on that, but I think his wife, isn't she Medea Benjamin?
She runs the Pink Code
Code
Pink.
Pink. I think one of the people who runs Code Pink is a lady named Medea Benjamin, I believe. I don't know if that's his wife, but just stop this shit. You have an absolute right. If you want to have a protest where you say, you don't like Donald Trump because he's, I don't know, you pick a topic. Feel free to go into, get a permit, have 10,000 people, 100,000 people, rant and rave. But if what you want to do is bring down the government of the United States to reject the Constitution as the Democratic Socialists of America want to do, and eliminate capitalism, free everybody in jail. That is not those positions. You're trying to bring down the government of the United States, the legitimate government. You're trying to destroy the Constitution without amending it. Yes, you can advocate for that, but if you're going to actually fund people to set up chops and have violent protests and dox political opponents, so that is far outside the bounds of what a tax exempt organization should be allowed to do, or that is far outside the bounds of what a tax exempt organization is allowed to do. And it would seem to me at this point, you should have your nominee in as head of the IRS. You should be able to go into the tax exempt organization. And when I look into it, some of the very same people who were attacking Tea Party organizations starting in 2009 are still in that tax exempt organization department. Why is that happening?
Now, this is interesting, Charles. Neville Sinclair's wife is this person, Jody Evans. And just as you were saying something about the Tea Party, it turns out that on January 30th, 2011, Evans was arrested for disruptive behavior at a Rancho Mirage hotel where she was leading a protest against David Koch and Charles Koch over their financial support for the Tea Party.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this Jody Evans and Medea Benjamin, I think, is definitely one of the co-founders of Code Pink. These people are, Singham has made a lot of money, I think, in the U.S. And you're totally entitled. If you don't like, and I frankly applaud him for living in communist China. That's where he belongs. But I don't think. If you ask Americans, I mean, judging by the recent Bill Maher's recent show where he read out loud the actual positions expressed in that tweet that you and I have been through in the past several times, he read that out for his audience on the show, and the audience literally gasped as he got to the things that the Democratic Socialists of America stand for. They want to not only overthrow the present Trump administration, they want to tear up the Constitution and create a Marxist state inside the United States of America. That is probably very popular in the faculty lounges across the United States, but a legitimate poll would show that maybe 7%, 5% of the voting population is in favor of that. People likely to vote, if that. And yet it's nonstop blaring on legacy media about, the puff pieces about Mondami and AOC, and even now about Newscomb and Pritzker and people like that. I mean, I think, we're living I'm not in America, obviously, but people living in America, how do you figure out what the truth, the true feeling of the American electorate right now? You're not going to get it on legacy media
Or HBO.
or HBO. And we're seeing now through a number of election cycles that you don't even get it through an election.
Well,
You
and I
know,
think we're even seeing in the alternate media, which for so long was considered kind of a bastion of free expression, it seems to be doing the same thing, being taken over.
right? Because they figured out it's the same formula. If you say that Walter Cronkite is the most trusted voice in America,
People trust him.
and if you people have a choice between the radio and network television, what are you going to do in the evening before and after dinner? I mean, things you could do, but you watch TV. It's a lazy man's approach to life. And there, Cronkite said this, must be right. That moves into, Brit Hume on Fox says
Well,
this,
also
must
not
be
just
right.
a lazy person, busy people. They want to know what's going on and they watch TV maybe while they're going to. I mean, it just becomes so much of a part of everyone's life. And now you have it on your phone, and when you're driving either on the train or whatever, people are dialed into these things and they just go to where the information is and
Well,
take it
but why
over.
I say lazy, I mean, in 2026, I mean, we I think in 2020 were right on the idea that what we were hearing from the government about COVID made no sense, right? And your various of your channels were taken down for expressing views that I think were 99.999% accurate, as opposed to Fauci's, which are 0.00001% accurate, right? So 6 years later, we were sold a gigantic bill of goods on COVID. That is after we were sold a gigantic bill of goods on the Russian collusion delusion. We've been
You know,
sold a gigantic bill of goods about 2009 to 2017, January to January, were the halcyon years.
Charles, right
Where
along the lines of what you're saying, it's happening right before our eyes. So now that RFK is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and they can't really deny him, right here on CNN, the Chicken Noodle Network, they're saying RFK targets Fauci and pushes medical misinformation, which is ridiculous. This is Dana Bash. He was yelling at her. It was fantastic, but he was Dana bashing. But now CNN, I mean, it's crazy, Charles. This is like Goebbels level propaganda where they just keep telling the same lie again and again. And, people believe it.
Yeah, but this is a battle. This battle, the battle about to expose and punish and fine and shut down fake nonprofit organizations that enrich their founders and promote the business activities of their large donors, and may aid and abet hostile foreign powers. That's a battle that you don't need the military to fight. That's a battle that a few working with a few conservative, principled state attorney generals, the IRS, the FBI, and the Department of Justice could, in probably 90 days, change the landscape of the not-for-profit world if they wanted to. You wouldn't need to, close the Gulf of America to do it.
But they're not doing it.
Right. Well, why not?
I
Is the
don't know.
question.
They're letting Norm thrive. He's, how many people must be sending, millions of dollars to these stupid things?
Yeah. And how does Norm get on Chicken Noodle News and MSNBC,
Right.
PMSNBC and all these shows nonstop, wall to wall?
It's crazy. They love him.
How explain his friendship with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? How does
Right.
that Chief Justice's wife have a consulting business? Working with clients to figure out how to deal with their various cases before courts, including possibly the Supreme Court. How is that permitted? You know, uh,
I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It seems like in a weekend, you could, as you're saying, we're not trying to change the government of a foreign country. You could, through the justice system, issue a couple of, targeted indictments on the right people. $10 million as a legal consultant, Jane Roberts. Just indict her
crazy.
and watch this whole legal system convulse. I mean, look at the look on that woman's face. These people have hijacked our government, our money, the system of justice. There is no justice. I get strangled by someone who the police admit they know. They won't tell me who it is. They won't press charges. They won't look at evidence. They won't let me file a police report in violation of the law, my rights, the Constitution. They tell me, get out of here or we're going to put you in Bellevue. The police are not basically, they're outright telling you that if you don't do what we say, we're going to lock you up somewhere where people can seriously hurt you, change the rest of your life, take away everything. They did this to everybody on January 6th.
Right. And increasingly, it's looking more and more that was a complete setup, January 6th, that many had knowledge well before January 6th of the events that were going to unfold. It was a plot to, having installed a puppet who was going to take the reins of government 2 weeks later. This was a plot to give color of law to an effort to just destroy Trump supporters. And that they did. A number of people killed themselves because of what the government did and the future they saw for themselves, all to maintain the fiction. I mean, you can, in a movie, you want to sell me a plot that's fanciful and soaring and interesting. Fine, I understand. I'm sitting in a movie. But in real life, to demand that the population fund governments, that the largest expense of any household typically is funding the government, to demand that we do that, and then have this government burn money while Biden was pretending to be president, um, enriching Democrat cronies, having John Podesta of all people hand out $300+ billion of government money for green scam projects. I mean, and do nothing about it. I mean, think of that, 300 billion. That's what we spent in Ukraine so far.
Well, they're
We
getting
haven't
ready
come.
to spend more. Actually, Charles, we've got a lot to discuss with Ukraine, and we've got,
Right.
even in the comments, it seems increasingly people are becoming very disappointed in Trump. He's not doing the things that he
Right.
said he would do. But we've got just about a minute here before we make our way over to the First Amendment Forum. We got to talk about what Laura's been doing with Ukraine. She's continuing to push what seems like Democrat propaganda. I can't believe it. Talking to the guy that Victoria Nuland wanted to install. People are going to be able to join us on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We've got another minute. Anything else you want to say before we go over there?
Yeah, a quick shout out. I spent the weekend at a birthday party in the mountains here, about 5 hours drive from Penang, in a place called Cameron Highlands, at an inn called the Old Smokehouse, Ye Old Smokehouse Inn, which is kind of like an English inn, 5,000 feet above sea level, here, on the equator. It's a very interesting experience. If people find themselves out in Penang, tack on a few extra days and go up to Cameron Highlands.
To Ye Old Smokehouse, and welcome to the Smokehouse Hotel.
It's really nice.
We'll
Very,
check
very
that
nice.
out when we come back from this brief break. Stay with us, everybody.